Common question that comes up in discussions about the impetus for the American Revolution is why only 13 of Britain's New World colonies actually rebelled? And there are two leading explanations to explain this. And both of them focus on the contiguity of the 13 colonies that wound up rebelling. So some scholars argue that thanks to the British victory in the French and Indian War, these 13 colonies suddenly became safe from French, Indian, and Spanish threats. So the Caribbean and Canadian colonies, by contrast, they remained highly dependent on the British Army and Navy for their survival, because they were still susceptible to enemy attacks. Okay, so in the Caribbean, including East and West Florida, this threat came from the Spanish, Dutch, and French navies. In Quebec and Nova Scotia, the argument goes, the threat to English settlers there came from both France and the large and potentially hostile local population, okay, the defeated French settlers as well as Indian inhabitants. So the point is that because these edge colonies, these frontline colonies, were less secure militarily, they were more appreciative of imperial protection. Now, this explanation is credible for the Caribbean colonies, but it cannot explain loyalism in Canada. The French Navy did not pose a meaningful threat to Quebec and Nova Scotia in the 1760s and 70s, after the French and Indian War and leading up to the American Revolution. And then on top of that, in Quebec, where the Americans tried to draw the French to join the rebellion, it was the small English population that was actually most receptive to American revolutionary propaganda. And the French settlers were not, the English settlers were. Okay, so the point about English settlers feeling insecure on the edges, again, it works for the Caribbean. It's not convincing in the Canadian colonies, Nova Scotia and Quebec. The second explanation is that thanks to social, religious, and commercial interactions between colonists in the 13 contiguous colonies, settlers over time developed a sense of community and camaraderie. Okay, what today we would call a sense of nationhood, okay, a sense of brotherhood. So some historians tie this nation building or emerging national consciousness. Some historians tie this to the Great Awakening, claiming that the revivals were a multi-denominational, multi-ethnic phenomenon, and not only that, they cut into all sorts of religious and denominational boundaries within society, but also cut across regional and class boundaries. And so the awakenings therefore created a kind of bond among Americans. And okay, so these scholars claim that in the second half of the 18th century, Englishmen in English communities in different colonies came to see themselves as Americans. And because of this, when the people of Massachusetts were penalized by the British during the implementation of the Intolerable Acts after the Boston Tea Party, then other American colonists felt a sense of kinship, again, a sense of nationhood, a sense of brotherhood with these victimized settlers of Massachusetts Bay Colony. So according to this argument, American nationhood was not a product of the American Revolution, but a cause or a prerequisite, of the war. It's what explains the impetus to join in opposition to Britain in solidarity with the people of Massachusetts. Now, there's a problem with this explanation as well. First, it ignores the strong commercial, social, religious, and even familial bonds between the New England colonies and Nova Scotia, as well as between uh, the Carolinas, North and South Carolinas, and the Caribbean colonies. Okay, so commercial, social, religious, and familial bonds between colonies that did rebel and colonies that chose not to rebel. Okay, so again, a sense of camaraderie and community and brotherhood between colonies that rebelled and colonies that did not rebel. Moreover, there's strong evidence that the colonists' identity was solidly English or British rather than American. Okay, that their identity, their allegiance, their affections, their patriotism was British rather than this new category, new identity of us Americans. This evidence suggests that a sense of American nationhood and community among American settlers was a product of the war, not a precursor of the war. Okay, you can see it more after the war than before the war. And indeed, the revolution began as an effort to preserve the existing status quo within the British Empire that had existed before the French and Indian War. Okay, so the revolutionary effort began as an effort as an attempt to roll the clock, to restore the living arrangement or the governing arrangement in the British Empire that existed before the French and Indian War. It did not start as an attempt to secede from Britain and form an independent American republic just for us, quote unquote, Americans. So the first two explanations have these problems with them. That something is not truly convincing. But there's a third option, which might better explain what united these 13 colonies, but not other colonies. So if the revolution was indeed a revolt that started with an effort to preserve the status quo, okay, that is to protect the powers and jurisdictions of local assemblies and local courts against Parliament's centralizing reforms, then it might simply be that other colonies also had this same English mindset of preserving local government against British efforts to centralize the imperial administration. And so all English settlers had this mindset of safeguarding local government against imperial centralization. It's just that these other colonies were able to achieve this kind of local autonomy without having to resort to forceful rebellion. Okay? So Nova Scotia certainly was successful in protecting its local administration from parliamentary intrusion, from parliamentary centralization. And in Quebec as well, the French majority was able to retain its control of its local courts of law, its land tenure system, and the supremacy of French civil law, not to mention the French language and French religious or Catholic religious liberties, and the legal status of the Catholic Church. Okay, so one could argue that all English colonies were intent on preserving local government in local hands against these new efforts by Parliament to change the nature of the British Empire, to centralize it, and to govern it from the center at the expense of local government. It's just that these colonies like Quebec and Nova Scotia, were able to achieve their localist goals within the empire. By contrast, the localist goals of the colonies in the 13 colonies to the south of Canada were not realized within the empire. They tried for a decade to resist these centralizing efforts, tried to protect their localist agenda against Parliament. And when they failed to achieve these localist goals within the empire, they wound up trying to accomplish them outside the empire. And indeed, you can see this in effect because upon victory, these colonies enacted a constitution, the first US Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, that enshrined local self-government for the 13 newly independent states. Thanks.